Thank you, Peggy. It's always great to be back in Tucson, great to be back at the Loft, great to be back and see my mom. But it's amazing to see the crowds here. I mean, I've always thought that the Loft Theater was the best film theater in the country, but now it seems like it might also be the most successful. And I think Netflix may have something to worry about here. I mean, maybe this is a model for bringing theatrical back. So anyway, so thank you all for coming. You're in for a real treat. This is a film by a young filmmaker. She was born in China, actually grew up in China. Made a film last year called Hooligan Sparrow. I don't know if any of you saw that. It was actually shortlisted for an Academy Award. It was about, it was really fascinating because she was hiding from the police. She was following people who were hiding from the Chinese police. She was following these activists that were trying to get justice for these 6 schoolgirls who'd been raped by a school headmaster. And the people she was following were getting put in jail, and she was hiding out and she was shooting it. So she's very, very courageous young filmmaker. And just a year later, she has this film, I Am Another You. It's equally ambitious, but in a completely different way. And it's one of my favorite films of the year, definitely. And I think it's perhaps the most poetic documentary I've seen this year. I'm sure it is. It's just wonderful in the way it examines issues around freedom and homelessness, and in a completely new way. So anyway, thanks again for coming, and I look forward to, and we all should look forward to talking to the filmmaker afterwards. Thank you. Well, that was incredible, I think. So we're going to be speaking with Nanfu Wong. She is in New York. She had just had a baby about 3 months ago, so that's why she couldn't come out. She does it all. But I've seen this film 3 times now, and every time I see it, it hits me harder.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, congratulations. Amazing film again. It's the 3rd time I've seen it, and it just gets...
Oh, wow.
oh, no, it just gets more and more beautiful. And you did such an incredible job of crafting the film, too. You know, as you watch a film several times, you just see all the decisions you made. So it was fantastic. And also,
thank you so much.
And also, I was just saying, it's to me, it's the most poetic documentary I've seen this year. It's just,
wow.
You've done really wonderful things with that film.
Oh wow, thank you.
So we have a very enthusiastic audience here. The Loft Theater is, I really think, the best theater in the country for seeing films.
Wow.
And so
yeah, I'm so sad to miss it. I wish I could be there.
Yeah. I explained to them that you had. How old is your baby now?
He is a little bit over 2 months, but he was born 6.5 weeks early, so technically he's only 2 weeks old. Yeah.
So you're gonna have 2 birthdays for him every time.
Yeah, I know.
So I was just curious. I wanted to ask you, how is Dylan doing now?
Dylan is now in California. He's still traveling. The same lifestyle that he's been living for several years. He came to South by Southwest to be at the premiere with his family. They all came out, his father, his stepmother, his girlfriend, and him. And at first, we were both excited, thinking that he is going to the festival circuit, traveling from one city to another. But after South by Southwest, he told me that he really enjoyed the experience of talking to people, which a lot of people expressed how his story had inspired them and enhanced the understanding of homeless people's lives. But after the premiere experience, Dylan told me, even though he enjoyed so much of talking to people, but being in that space and facing the entire theater's people, the voices in his head has amplified, and he felt overwhelmed. And so he said he was going to take a break from attending screenings, and he wanted to be kept a little bit, to have a little bit privacy. Yeah. Last time I talked to him was a few days ago. He told me he was working on a ranch in California, and he didn't know what the name of the place was, which is very typical of him.
So, so did he say anything about the film?
Yeah, so I showed him for the first time before the premiere because I wanted to know how he felt about it before anybody else saw it. I remember I was very nervous because usually, we are all self-conscious. I would never let anybody make a film about me. So I sent him the link.
Except you.
I sent him the link, and on the same day, I sent the link to the father as well. So both of them could watch in different places, but at the same time. Dylan, he couldn't get access to a computer, so he actually watched on a cell phone in the bathroom together with his girlfriend, because they couldn't find a place that's quiet enough, that's not so they end up watching it on the floor of a bathroom, and they locked the door. And after they watched it, I called them both. Dylan said to me, I asked him, I said, is there anything that you are unhappy with? Is there anything that you felt you are misrepresented, you're embarrassed or anything? And he said, no, nothing. And I was very surprised. That, are you sure there is nothing that you felt uncomfortable? And he said to me, it's very rare that people like us would ever get their story told, let alone being told in such an artistic way. So I really appreciate it. And then I called his father, and his father said this film had helped him understand Dylan so much better. And each of them, Dylan said that was the first time he ever learned that his father does the video journal. He didn't know that before. So a lot of things that both sides, Dylan and his father, they learned for the first time through watching the film.
Wow,
yeah.
Wow. Can you talk about what it was like to live on the street and make a film at the same time?
I would say it was the most interesting experience I will ever have making a film, probably. The production of the first part of The Street Life probably was the lowest budget out of all the documentary films, because I didn't spend my own money. I made a decision to eat out of the garbage can along with Dylan. And sometimes I had to play different roles in order to survive. To capture some of the most organic scenes, I had to sometimes play as if I was a homeless person too. And there were times I was sitting on the sidewalk, people would come up and give me money, and usually I would get more money than Dylan. And one time somebody gave me $100, and that was much better than being a documentary filmmaker, I feel. And I remember the first time I was very touched by the generosity of people was one morning. I remember it was 6 a.m. Dylan and I hadn't eaten the night before, so we were pretty starving. And we were digging out of the garbage can on the street. And at the time, it was so early and there was nobody on the street. And there was one car passing by. And a few minutes later, the car drove back. It came back and it stopped by us. And then the driver lowered the window and yelled at us. He was like, come over here. And we walked by and we didn't know what he was thinking of doing. And he said, here's $20, go get yourself some breakfast. I mean, as I said, there were many people would give money to Dylan, but that was the moment I was thinking that person drove by and he drove away several minutes, probably many blocks away, and he came back. And I was wondering what he was thinking during the time. He was debating, he was making a decision, he was thinking about us, and then eventually made a decision to turn around and come back. And it was that kind of thinking and putting into his position and knowing somebody has gone through that kind of thought process. And I just was very, very amazed by it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because homeless are so rarely seen; they're always ignored. So it's interesting that to think that somebody would be so conscious of that they'd be thinking about it for minutes and then come back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the many things I think that's incredible about your film is the way that you start in this kind of examination of freedom, and then you move into this examination of homelessness, and it's all sort of one continuous thread, which is fascinating, even on a philosophical level. I was wondering, have you shown this film to people who are social workers and work with the homeless or psychologists, and how do they react to this, and how are they possibly using it?
Oh, very early on, I think it was in March, the film was shown in Ashland, and then there were a big just a homeless community around there, and there were social workers organizations. They all attended and had a discussion, used it as case study, and to better understand the group of people and then to know what they really want. Because a lot of them, for example, Dylan might not want to be in a shelter. A lot of them do not want to be in a shelter, and they want something else. They want to be seen. They want to be understood. They want to have conversations with people. And I think I wasn't there at the case study in person, but I Skyped in, and I was happy to hear some of the discussions. And also the film has been used as case study in universities for students to come up with transmedia cases, how to use this film to advocate for homeless people and to encourage people to have more compassion towards them.
Do you have a non-theatrical distributor that's getting it out to those sort of professionals?
So the film is distributed through Film Rise, which is a theatrical distributor, but they're also doing the VOD and everything else, educational, non-theatrical. And it's also going to be broadcasted on Independent Lens, and they are doing a lot of work around the film too.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Lois Bosson. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, they financed the Invisible War when nobody else would. So yeah,
wow.
she's amazing. Going back to freedom, I mean, I'm just sort of interested in your perspective on how, the meaning of freedom in China versus the United States, and how it's different and how it's looked at differently from, you have this perspective.
For me, I think the biggest surprise, or the most impressive aspect of freedom that is different, that I didn't enjoy in China, which is the freedom of choice. And I think that's also why when I first met Dylan, I was immediately fascinated by him. In China, as the opening sequence shown, we are all expected to conform, to be the same. Like all the buildings, everything, we are not encouraged to have our own individuality. And there is a very consistent value system to evaluate what is success, and just every aspect. I mean, it exists here too, but I find diversity is much more, I would say, visible here than in China. In China, as a woman, for example, my family would say, you don't need much education. Your life is expected to graduate from college, find a good husband, and then just the rest of your life. Most people my age, they find a job and then never switch, no matter how much they dislike it. There were a lot of things, fear of failure, fear of criticism. And when I came here, it struck me that how many people can make decisions at any stage of their lives to change. And that's something that I really appreciate.
Has the film I mean, how would the film be seen in China, or has it been shown in China? This is something I'm very curious about.
No, it hasn't been shown in China, although I found a lot of Chinese people really, really interested in the film because in China we had some sayings. I think people fantasize America and American freedom. Before I came here, people would say, "Oh, even homeless people are free and happy in America." So when I told part of the story and my experience to people in China, they couldn't believe it, and they wanted to see it. And it's a film that could be shown, and I feel like would have a big audience in China. The only thing though is I've made Hooligan Sparrow before, and I'm kind of like on the list. And also the film has a short montage of a Hooligan Sparrow, and that makes things complicated. I've had a distributor in China asking me if I can take that part out of the film or if I can edit some part, and I haven't done that yet. So the film was shown in Taiwan, and people really liked it. There was a very good reception.
I'm curious, do you feel like you're being monitored in the United States, your work, by the Chinese?
Yes, I know that for sure, because especially last year when Hooligan Sparrow was in the news a lot, my family would constantly get the threats from the government. They told my family to warn me not to say anything in the media, in interviews. And they told my family that they are monitoring that. And they also asked my family to tell me to not mention that they had come to see them. I don't know if this makes sense. And funny enough, I had a friend who studied here and then went back to China and now is working for the government. And because of her, English capability, she's working in the propaganda department, and her job is to monitor a list of people in the media and to every day create this daily brief and for her supervisor. And one day she received the name, like the new bunch of lists, and I was on the list. So that's how I found out, like for sure.
Yeah. Well, if she comes back, you should make a film about her and her experience.
I hope so. I think it would be very fascinating to make a film about all the government officials in China. Like if anybody could have the access.
Yes. Well, I want to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions? Here we go.
I'm just wondering what you thought about homeless people or homelessness before you made the film.
Can you hear that? The question is what you thought about homeless people before you made the film.
I didn't have a lot of preconceptions, as I said, of coming from China, and people romanticize homeless people from there. And I remember my first encounters of lots of homeless people was in Miami, and that was prior to my meeting with Dylan. It was the second night after I arrived in Florida, and it was 3 a.m. I got to Miami, and I was thinking to myself, I was so poor. I didn't want to spend money in the hotel for a few hours, so I decided to just walk around the city. And around 3 a.m., the city was completely different from the day, and every block I saw some homeless people, and I was very curious just about their stories, where they came from, and what happened to them, why they ended up being on the streets. So I started talking to them. I would make a conversation, asking all those questions that I had. And most of them were either mentally or physically disabled. And that was very apparent. So when I met Dylan, he seemed to be different from all those people. He was capable, he was healthy, and at the time, I just see him being this healthy, young, articulate, smart guy, yet made a decision to live on the streets. And that's why I was like, why he's making this decision and he's unlike all those others? And then I followed him instead. Yeah.
Okay.
Mental illness in China,
Excuse me?
how prevalent is it, and how do they address mental illness in China?
Oh, that's a very good question. How do they address mental illness in China?
I think there isn't a lot of understanding about mental illness, especially from the place where I came from, which is a very remote village. I remember when I was little, there was a mentally ill person in our village. Yet the entire village people would say that is contagious. You don't go close to her. You don't even go close to their family. And she has a son, which is in my class, and most of the students wouldn't play with him because we all believe that this is a kind of illness. If you play with people who are crazy, then you would end up being crazy too. Even minor mental health problems like depression, which is very commonly understood here, is not so in China. People so stigmatized about it. And later on, when I was making Hooligan Sparrow, what struck me was lots of the activists were diagnosed with mental illness. The police and the authority usually would fake medical records, show that they have mental illness to arrest them. And when they are in the mental hospital, then they don't have any free will. Not even their family could get them out. So for me, when Dylan's father first told me that, or hinted that Dylan might have some mental problems, at the time I just thought that they saw him as different. And yeah.
Wow. No, it's so interesting that both these films, in freedom and mental illness, there's this axis in both these films in much different ways. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to thank you for making this film because I work with folks who have the homeless population, and many do have a diagnosis of a serious mental illness or addiction issues. And like he said in the very beginning, he wanted his freedom. And one thing I noticed in your film is I never saw him go to reach out to resources because there are resources available in every city, because he probably did not want to comply. And that is the issue that we have. I'm a housing specialist now. I'm an instructor. I help them get employment. But when I was a housing specialist, I had a man who was housed for a year, and he never stayed in his apartment. He was still camped out. And so it's just an interesting film, and I really do hope a lot of people see it, and thank you for making it.
Thank you.
I don't think that was a question, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Can you see? You can't. Can you see the audience? Or?
No, I wish I could only see you.
There was this. Now can you?
Yes, it's a little bright. Yes. Hi. Now I feel like I'm talking to lots of
Maybe
people.
this is better. Yes. Okay.
Hi, this is a cute dog.
Okay, there's a question in the back with the blue hat. Yes. Turban. Okay.
Thank you so much. Again, I agree, for making the film. I was impressed by how you showed the voices in his head two times. Once your impression, I think, and the artistic, the bird. I mean, there were a lot of things going on, but the flock of birds stands out in my memory right now. And then the way he had it reenacted was so powerful and painful to see him being willing to be affected by it. I mean, it was just, that was amazing filming, amazing. Thank you. I don't really have a
That was
question.
really a challenge when I was making it because when I finally realized when Dylan told me, admitted that he heard voices, and for a while I was just completely, questioning my own perceptive. I couldn't believe that I spent so much time with a person and thought that I knew him so well, yet was so blind to see so many things that was quite visible to many other people. And I started reading lots of books, trying to understand schizophrenia, trying to understand all those symptoms, and from the books that was written by first person or different other perspective. But I felt like even though through a lot of reading and research, and I still couldn't experience it. I couldn't imagine what it's like. And eventually I had to ask Dylan. I thought if he could do this himself, then at least it would be the closest portrayal that I can do to show what it's like to be him. Yeah, I think the library scene, I was very impressed by Dylan's capability because he came up with the idea and he actually went to the library in Florida, Keys West, and not Key West, but the Keys Marathon. And he convinced the people in the library to let us use the room and to do all those things. And then he went around to ask all his friends, explain to them what he really wanted to do and how it would play out. Most of the people didn't believe him. They thought that he was joking, he was making it up, that somebody was going to film it. And when I showed up, he was very happy. He's like, finally, all those people now knew that it's real, that I didn't just bullshit them.
So I hear your baby. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, you heard him?
Yes. So I wanted to ask you something about that. So was the concept of that, was that Dylan's concept that everybody would be reading at once and
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was his idea. And what's interesting is I thought all those people they were reading and the passages we were reading was so relative to their experience.
Yeah. No, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
go ahead.
It's probably hard to hear like each individual's reading, but when I was editing, like each person, when they read something or they improvise, some of them improvise something, and it's very relevant to homelessness, mental illness.
Yeah. No, it was fascinating. A couple more questions. Okay, go ahead.
If I couldn't hear the full question, but was the how much of the editing was conscious and how much was unconscious? Was that the question? That's a very good question. I wish it was unconscious, but I had. But I would say that every editing was very interesting and challenging. Every second of the film that you see on the screen is many days of struggling, tons of footage, probably like gigabytes of footage, days of struggling, thinking, end up being that 1 second. It's a lot of trial and error. And I think some of the edits, the decisions were made when I was shooting. For example, the scene that Dylan was dreaming that lots of fish, that he fell asleep in front of a mirror. That was, that sequence was filmed in many different days, different occasions. One day he fell asleep in front of the mirror of all those fish and the ocean. And then several days later, he went to a pet store to buy the fish, and he was in front of the fish tank. And while I was filming that, which is totally irrelevant, But at the time, I was thinking, wait a minute, the other night he fell asleep, and this actually felt like could be in his dream. And that was a conscious decision made while I was on the field filming. So back then, I knew that I was going to edit this into a dream sequence. And then with the birds, that was something that came up during the editing as I was editing the voices, trying to amplify the tension and the feeling. And then there is birds, which is another day shot, another day too. But it's like spending hours and hours of watching the footage, seeing it, and then at one point the inspiration came after days of just sitting and staring at the footage.
Yeah, so making documentaries is the most labor-intensive art form, I think.
Yeah.
It's great. You have to be a workaholic, I think, or
Yeah.
you don't get into business.
Yeah.
So in the back.
One more question, maybe?
Okay, one more question.
Do you think that Dylan growing up in a very constrictive community where performing, following a certain pattern of living, influenced him to leave his family and become homeless? Do you think that was part of his decision?
So the question was, do you think that Dylan growing up in a very restrictive family and maybe culture influenced him to make the decision to leave his family and become homeless?
Definitely, and he was very open about it, and that's something that he told me the first day I met him, the first night before I even started filming. And that was a huge reason why I was attracted to his story. He told me that he was born in this Mormon family and it was very restrictive. His entire family, grandparents, his parents were religious and they attended church. They went to church every week and all the time. I mean, only until he was a teenager, around 14, 13, that he started to have so many questions, and all those questions were not answered. And then eventually he lost faith in the religion. And when he realized that the fundamental belief in this system collapsed, he didn't know what to believe anymore. And that was one of the biggest reasons that eventually pushed him to try drugs to leave home. And during the fight in the film with his younger brother, that's something that he's very concerned too, because his younger brother is still very, very religious. And Dylan mentioned he's worried, what if one day that he didn't believe in the religion, what would happen to him?
Okay. Oh, okay. Here we go. All right. This is the award.
Oh,
Thank
thank you.
you.
That's so exciting.
Thank you. Amazing films. We really, really look forward to more. And thank you so much for.
Thank you so much.
And we'll send this
Yeah.
to you.
Thanks, Kirby.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
out to see the film. Thank you.
Thank you.